Happy Halloween, dear readers! Previously, I went over the first chapter for Daniel Greene's introductory pamphlet, Breach of Peace, and I gave the first chapter a 3 out of 10 due to an absurd amount of red herrings that distract us from the actual plot, as well as an incredible amount of world building and character issues that range from inconsistency to downright stupidity. So, if I can establish this much wrong with the first chapter and I already made my verdict, why should I continue in the story? Well, 2 reasons. 1. Daniel Greene is currently reviewing Rings of Power, with the only major critique being that the pacing's a little off. Yeah, Daniel, because that's a big issue with the show, isn't it? 2. His second book has been out for a while now, and I think it's due time to review that horrible murder of art as well. Also, either Daniel got some new ink to please his fancy fans, or he's been spending some extra dough on applying some temporary tattoos. Am I the only one noticing that for some reason these white YouTubers always get random arm tattoos once they start hitting their 30s? What is this, a tribute to Steve-O? Might as well have Daniel get a tattoo of himself reading the book on his back so everyone at the beach can see he's a sexy nerd. But enough playful banter, let's get on with the analysis. This restaurant menu of a story is what we call a novelette, meaning it's bigger than a short story but shorter than a novel. For something like fantasy, this is practically unheard of, and due to everyone trying to desperately make the next postmodernist version of Lord of the Rings depth because of a D&D addiction among people with asthma. Yet, short fantasy stories were a big thing in the past. Fairy tales were rather big and always have been. Short stories for pulp magazines during the Depression were aimed at the working class, so having something short and Lovecraftian is appropriate in that regard. However, that is the idea on paper, due to the fact that Daniel already messed up on the opening exposition phase with how the majority of this novelette is a red herring. If the majority of the story is a waste, there's no reason to care for the actual story. Remember, the blurb talks about how there's a rebellion and the officers had to solve the mystery of who killed this imperial family. The entire blurb revolves around the mystery aspect, yet this is a high fantasy setting that is supposed to result in a Lovecraftian monster being summoned by some kind of cult. I'm all for a good twist, but this is like revealing the world is run by machines and the entire thing was a simulation while calling it a Sherlock Holmes movie. Some might like the twist, but most people don't. In this video, I mostly want to touch up on the exposition phase, which introduces us to the characters, and I guess all the evidence for this faking gay mystery that results in the critical information being handed to them off-screen. The 5-point structure of exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution doesn't have much room to move around in this type of story. So we can expect everything after chapter 1 to be rise in action, with perhaps the last chapter being the final 3 points. But that's not how it is here, due to the next chapter being still part of the exposition phase. And we'll examine it now as we get back to where we left off. Page 17. The subtitle of Chapter 2 is The Madness. How appropriately titled because it's going to be maddening getting through this slop. What I can get from such a title is that this mystery is going to enter the realm of insanity and we can learn more about how these people were killed and possibly about what killed them. As in, lean away from saying it was multiple humans as Clid tried so hard to misdirect us towards. What the 3 Stooges find on their way to the master bedroom is the wife, and I guess she's called the wife because Daniel didn't want to bother giving her a name, which is a sign of a half-assed red herring. At least go all the way and punch the prostate if you're gonna screw us like this. Who is she the wife of? The child in front? The girl who fell off the banister? Is she Chapman's wife? You can't just call her the wife and expect us to know who she is.
Wait a minute! Who are you?
Give her a name, or give some context, because we can't expect anything to be normal in a fantasy story. And Daniel tries his hand at gore as he explains the body parts of the wife are strewn about the room like toilet paper after a cat gets its claws on a roll. There's little blood, but somehow there's a pool of blood under a heart that sits on the dresser. I admire the little bit of effort to sound gory, but this is a big issue in a lot of body horror types of stories. Just telling us something gory happened doesn't give us much of an impression. You have to tell us the smell. You have to tell us how dry or wet something is. Adjectives are your friend when trying to tell us the details of something like this. I see the problem all the time in creepypastas, you know, stories that are free and written by bored teenagers, where they give a bare-bone image. If Daniel really wanted to go for something gothic or Lovecraftian, he would put more effort into the details in setting the scene. The wind would be broken with wind howling in the dark room as the 3 open the creaking door. Adding something like that creates atmosphere and tension, with symbolism enhancing the foreshadowing that is brought to the table, and we can also strengthen the overall theme. Having an event happen with none of these aspects is no different than an outline or a footnote. I might as well be reading this from Daniel's Google Docs as he types up random ideas he gets while sitting on the toilet. Also, telling me there was a pool of blood, but then surprisingly there was little blood, doesn't give me a great idea of the scene with that kind of contradiction. I can understand that there can be a pool of blood while the rest of the room has little blood, especially since blood pumped through the heart, but at least add something to the mood where perhaps the pool of blood was caused by the heart releasing its reserves on its few final pumps. That way the detective skills of the characters can enhance the scene and establish an event of how all this happened for the reader to imagine. I want to imagine this scene, but all I can think of is that the room looks like someone rage quit a game of Operation with how bland and clean it feels. It needs to feel messy and grimy, not be written as such. At least mention candles having to be turned on or something, or these people have light switches already. Either way, the cellar is locked and people hear movement inside, because naturally it couldn't be a bunch of rats having a BBP orgy down there. And BBP means a big black plague, for those of you with a dirty mind. So Chapman is downstairs trying to open the cellar, and the married cunts are staring at a bite mark on the wife's face. Not Clid's face. It's confusing with how Clid is constantly called his wife, and then there's his wife, who's dead in the room, but it's the wife of whoever owns the joint. They are big and powerful, the focus of the mystery, but yeah, just call them the wife and call it a day, why don't you lazy ne'er-do-well. What bothers me the most is that there's a bite mark on the face of the wife, the chunk of flesh is spat out on the pillow, and yet there's no motive for this action. If it's a creature who is there to drink blood, why bite the face? If it's rebels, why bite the face? Is Mike Tyson going to make a cameo? This seems to be done for the sake of looking nasty, and this is a big issue in body horror. Yes, I know I said the other thing was a big issue, but you know what? Body horror is the weakest of the horror genres because of those flaws, and because it's so easy to enter the genre as an amateur. Oh great, make something gory, just like any zombie show that has 1 million seasons with nothing happening. That'll sure entertain the kids. Movies like The Thing, Army of Darkness, and Hellraiser are perfect examples of body horror done right with Lovecraftian elements added. All you had to do to make something Lovecraftian, or more accurately known as cosmic, is add cosmicism, the philosophy that giant aliens and other dimensions may exist and humanity's place in the grand scheme of things is meaningless to these larger entities. The Thing has an alien that copies humans simply because humans are around. Army of Darkness has a Necronomicon which simply uses human flesh and blood to write down ways to summon old ones. And Hellraiser is just about sadomasochism done at a cosmic level. I know I'm rambling on about what Lovecraftian stories should be like, but that's the thing. I'm not sure how any of this alludes to a Lovecraftian story. If it's about rebels, then this murder might as well be a Gasland fantasy of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, minus Alexander Daddario's rockin' tits. The point is, having body horror and nothing quite Lovecraftian yet turns this supposed creepy murder mystery into a campy slasher story until something engaging happens or we get something interesting in the mystery aspect. Part of me thinks people didn't like the story because it's like watching the boring parts from Saw instead of thinking it's something like Jack the Ripper or a Sherlock Holmes homage. I guess the last two need more brains and effort than what Daniel was willing to offer.
One love or two.
Clid and Samuel realize the man of the house isn't around, and they suspect he's in the cellar, and somehow it's a bad thing that Chapman is going to the cellar to investigate, as if that guy's a danger to the man of the house. What exactly is the problem? Do they fear the guy will say, "McClunky," and Chapman will shoot first? Let's find out on the next page. Page 18. Finally, I can praise something. Daniel put a scene break indicator in the book. Thank you, Daniel. It's the little things that count. Just like your Cheerio-sucking mouth. Chapman hated when things didn't open for him. Yeah, like Clid's legs. Show don't tell, we all know this except Daniel didn't seem to get the memo. Chapman wants to blow up the door, and I do admire the attempt at humor. It's pretty funny until you realize Chapman is supposed to be an officer of God, meaning him trying to handle things like a CNC commando is a little confusing. Rollins, the supposed only other cop at the scene, tries to pick the lock but finds out it's not locked. Maybe he's supposed to push instead of pull. Chapman's dialogue afterwards, however, is charming. He asks for a crowbar with a loud voice, it jolts Rollins awake, and it would have been better for him to have an arm hand him a crowbar from off screen, but I guess I can give this a pass. I mean, Clid has cigarettes appear out of nowhere, why can't Chapman get a crowbar from thin air? This is a fantasy, right? Right after this though, we have one of the worst exchanges in the entire story. At least from what I remember. Rollins puts his hand to his revolver and tells Chapman that some manors have secret exits. This is valid, I guess. I played Wolfenstein, I found a few secret doors and Nazi castles in my day, the manor shouldn't be much different. But then Chapman says, Rollins, you're good at your job, but there's a reason you're not an inspector. The other officer makes a sad emoji face at the statement and makes Chapman apologize. Chapman tells him that he says things he doesn't mean because he thinks it's funny. Hey, other officer with no name, why don't you fetch us a hammer so Daniel can use it on the reader's head with that kind of ham-fisted delivery? I get that Daniel wanted it to be where Chapman speaks before he thinks, but to tell us in such a half-assed way is a big sign of poor writing skills and a lack of confidence in character actions. We don't need to be told the personalities of the people in the story. Not every story needs to have dialogue as pretentious as the show House MD. Oh yes, I said it. What are you gonna do about it?
You're a racist! But I know it's just your way of keeping people at a distance, so I'm not gonna say anything, even though in real life I would break your other leg.
A bit of advice, don't tell us something right after showing it. If your plan is to force a fake and gay reaction from other characters just so a character reveals their personal character flaws, as if it's known to the one who has the flaw, then your plan might need some reworking. I don't know, maybe don't have this officer god even care about the feelings of some random lesser officer. This is a hierarchy, this is a dystopia, this is an evil and heartless right-wing monarchy. Yet everyone working in this dystopian imperialist empire acts like bleeding heart liberals.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
If you want Chapman to be flawed, have him not even care about Roland's feelings. Chapman should have told him and the other officer to eat his ass.
Eat my ass, sir. Do not make me use enhanced interrogation techniques. Eat my ass!
Double down on the flaw and have it challenged later when it's appropriate. Or, better yet, don't have Rollins be a bitch about it because we have no idea why he's not an inspector. Who the hell is this guy anyway?
Wait a minute. Who are you?
All I know is that he's physically weaker than the woman, and he takes any remarks straight to the cornhole like a sissy. Has he even applied to being an inspector? Has he been in the force long enough to even be relevant? Do we see him after the investigation scene? To all those questions, I will safely answer, no. But that's because I didn't read one paragraph later, when Daniel tells us directly that Rollins has tried to finish the inspector test several times, but failed because of poor deductive reasoning. Well, that skill's sort of important to the job, isn't it? Maybe if he was a minority of this fantasy world he could get in as a diversity hire, but sadly he seems to be a disgusting white cis male. It's not Chapman's fault this guy sucks at putting two and two together. Get good, scrub. However, this entire scene is one big cockblock because instead of having a fun adventure pulling down candle holders and tilting books on bookshelves to find the hidden passages, we just have to wait for Chapman to get his crowbar and go at it like a caveman. And Daniel points us to a door, and as we open the door to walk through, he sets up a bucket of green farts to fall on us. To say it simply, this cop-out stinks!
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Author tubers? Seriously, stop promising better stories within your lesser story to the reader.
Stop it!
And Daniel did that in the beginning with talks about fancy relics, and now he's doing it again with creative secrets in the manor. I think I compared this to Resident Evil before, and I must really stress this, if you're gonna go a Resident Evil route, just take it. What is stopping Daniel from turning the single manor into a pleasant little funhouse with traps and monsters and history of all sorts of goodies?
We're almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
Just like the simple cabin in Evil Dead. People love the idea of a story taking place in one single yet detailed location, but what do we know? We are just the people who read your shit and pay your bills. It gets weirder as the officer who brought the crowbar holds the crowbar, and holds it to use his eyes to tell Chapman that underlings stick together. I'm absolutely fascinated as to how eyes can convey such a message. Did he blink in Morse code? I thought this kind of terrible writing couldn't get worse, but soon we find out how utterly wrong I was.
But wait! There's more! Hang on to your seat, baby!
The telling continues as Daniel tells us how there is tension between inspectors and the regular members. Probably how like there's tension between long-term prisoners and fish. I've heard of sour rapes, but this is ridiculous. Apparently, in this world that Daniel calls a hellish dystopia that he wouldn't want to have for himself due to the political nature of everything, we are treated as some backstory of the world where unions are able to punish the higher up on the food chain inspectors, and these unions are ran and controlled by what's called the regular member of the force. This specific type of fan service has a lot of inner context to be added in order to understand why he's even saying any of this. You see, Daniel is a self-proclaimed socialist. I wanted to make a video about his feminist and socialist views that seem to always get involved with his channel that is meant for fantasy and media. However, there's not much there for me to say other than, He's a champagne socialist raised by a lesbian couple and is so sheltered that he started a booktube channel after getting out of college. Big whoop.
Whoop-de-doo! What does it all mean, Basil?
Honestly, I don't see this as a terrible thing, even though I personally see the idea of a union exists in the story as the key part of the whole dystopia, rather than a fix towards utopia. But that's neither here nor there. If Daniel wanted to put socialist propaganda in his book to live out a bit of fantasy in a fantasy story, good for him, and I fully support it. Despite me being an evil religious capital pig who would be the first target in the Marxist revolution, I don't mind the idea of someone trying to convince me that their way is better or my way has flaws. The better the argument, the better the path we can all take towards a new tomorrow. However, the best thing for something like capitalism is to have a white cis male show the issues of socialism and feminism in their dark fantasy story by complete accident due to terrible writing. It's kinda like in Cyborg Tinker or Jenna Moresi books, where the whole woke diversity narrative is turned into a checklist and nothing more. It hurts their argument entirely, and it strengthens my side completely. Daniel had backlash from this book in reviews where people thought he was pro-monarchy and some kind of sexist right-winger because of how poorly he portrayed what he actually believes in. Sure, it was silly of him to make a video about the backlash and call out a few small fries directly because out of his 400k subs there's bound to be some useful idea attack dogs who will harass innocent people, but trust me, Daniel's a nice guy. And I don't think I'm calling him a virgin with rage or anything with that nice guy bit. Just look at him, he would fit perfectly fine in one of those Pornhub stepsister videos. He's a natural lady killer. And back to the story, we are told that some of the more political officers are denying the idea that inspectors act as a Judge Dredd and be the judge, jury, and executioner whenever they want. I guess when he says political, he means the activities within an organization that are aimed at improving someone's status or position and are typically considered to be devious or divisive. I'm not sure if people would see such a word be used in this way at first glance, but I would call this word one of those bastard words that makes things difficult to picture an idea without dictionary handy. I mean, how many of us understand it this way within this context? It's not a big deal, but I will give you some advice, dear reader. Just because a word is accurate doesn't mean it reads that way to the reader. Clarity in colloquial usage is more important than accuracy, even though we might see it as the contrary. For example, if we are waking up and it's dawn, there's no reason for me to say, good dawn, because a colloquial greeting during such time is, good morning. This was just a little thing that bugged me. The more important to the story matter is that somehow the inspectors are of a higher rank, they have more power, and yet the lesser officers have made a union and a ye old Twitter where they can cancel people with articles. Chapman's gonna get Peterson for calling the cops stupid thanks to a union. I can't tell where the dystopia is, Daniel. Can you point it to us? Page 20. The story gets worse. Yes, that's possible. I know, I was surprised too. Chapman's thoughts and prayers are then adopted by the narrator as italic words follow his thoughts. His thoughts also intrude within the description sentence such as, Chapman stepped back from the thick, oak maybe? Door. If the narrator knows Chapman's thoughts but can't tell what kind of wood there is, the mind-reading power of the third-person omniscient is a little bit on the fritz. The narrator is not Chapman, it's a separate being. Why do I have to explain this to Daniel? I get it, he wanted to try something new, but this doesn't work because it's an inconsistency in point of view. Diarrhea. We are a separate being, then we are Chapman, then we are a separate being again, all in the same sentence. And for what? To tell the reader that Chapman doesn't know his oaks from his birches? Well, Chapman gets a hand from retard Roland, as if that's going to do anything, and they pry open the door. The paragraph that describes the darkness they see is a bit wonky, as it's written like so. As you can see, there's the word impenetrable all on his lonesome smack dab in the middle. I understand that it's meant to be very thick darkness, we are to feel a bit frightened at this event, but the idea gets muddled by having the word on its own, because it's distracting rather than mood enhancing. The distraction is caused by a very tiny error that is hard to detect unless you look really closely at the paragraph and notice that there are two subjects, Chapman and the darkness. Roland is put as a primary subject, then the subject switches to Chapman, with the darkness being the third subject. To explain it real quick, a sentence has a subject as the one doing the actions, and the direct object is that which has actions performed on them. However, the deepest black greets the two, meaning this black is treated as a subject for the next sentence. Yet the other two are also subjects in the sentence prior. We only assume the black is impenetrable because we assume nobody is trying to penetrate Rollins or Chapman, unless they decided to make up for that little mishap that happened earlier.
I'm gay.
The sentences are active, we can understand what's going on, but it looks messy and this is why. Subject juggling is hard. We usually don't realize we're juggling so much when we're writing. But you'd think an editor or beta reader would catch such a thing, assuming that there were any. I remember he said he had sensitivity readers scan over it and pretend that they were helping, so I say money well spent and I'm glad he had his priorities straight.
Now you need to give it to editors. You need line editors, copy editors, proofreaders. It's important to do this. Even development editing, get it all done and get it done by professionals. This is not as expensive as you might think, but it is going to be a pretty penny.
What? What?
Come on, Daniel, this is basic sentence structure. We were taught this back in first grade. I get it, sometimes it goes over our heads because it's so basic and never handled step by step, but the least he could have done is read over it again and check for anything odd. Something tells me Rollins is only in this book because he's a Daniel Greene self-insert. I will apply a bit of a plaster to his ego by saying the sentence, something told Chapman that the deep darkness would dominate the cellar, has some nice alliteration and that's always appreciated. Rollins shouts a command into the darkness, they get no response, and then Chapman closes the door. What door? Did they close the cellar already and call it a done day? Is the cellar entrance inside the house? I have no idea what's going on in the scene because it seems Daniel didn't either. Pro tip for you, dear reader. Let the reader know what's going on and where. Never forget the who, what, when, where, why, and how of a scene. People like Daniel and Lindsay tend to forget the where, even though sometimes they are too anal about where something is. Maybe I have the benefit of a bad memory, but is this a big thing with authors where some can't read their own writing with a blank slate? Just pretend someone else wrote it. Come on, it's not that hard.
Come on, look, man, look, fat, I saw the head of my dick, man, I saw a fucking thing in the head of my dick, man, come on, man, look.
Daniel has a comedic part here where Chapman forgets the name of the nameless officer and wants to call him Officer Shits. Well, the shoe shits wear it. With a character named Clid, it's not so hard to imagine another person named Shits or maybe Biggus Dickus.
What's funny about Biggus Dickus? Well, it's a joke name, sir. I have a very great friend in Rome called Biggus Dickus.
This part is not horribly done. I actually enjoy the idea of Chapman not remembering names, as a person who is terrible with both names and faces. So Daniel, congrats! A good paragraph. Chapman snapping his fingers and extending his hand at the end is a wonderful wrap-up to such a paragraph. Really, bravo. Page 21. Okay, I take back my bravo, because Daniel decided to follow it up with yet more triggered union members and strange narration. The narrator now calls the poor bastard whose name we've forgotten Officer Shits, and Officer Dookie Pants makes another stink eye that tells his whole life story. Then Chapman thinks, I'm an idiot, then says, please. I don't know if Chapman is trying to be diplomatic as a ruse to trick everyone into thinking he's not a jerk, or if Daniel is seriously having trouble trying to make Chapman a lovable asshole. Here's the thing. We, as readers, love hammy jerks who chew the scenery and make themselves the star of the show. We love the Gaston type because nobody eats pussy like Gaston. This is a wonderful trope that works well in the fantasy, and especially works well in dark fantasy or grimdark to bring a little life to the desolating mood. I'm saying it here, we love assholes. No homo.
Fuck you! Now stick that up your ass. No homo.
The problem comes when they are being too extra, or the story mistakes them for the morally good character that we should follow as the right way. Ash from The Evil Dead is a perfect example of how to do a lovable asshole properly. And I would say Chapman is how you do it improperly because the lovable asshole is supposed to be unaware of their actions having negative feedback. If Chapman is egotistical, he wouldn't notice due to it not feeling his ego. If Chapman was ignorant or arrogant, again, he wouldn't notice because he's not aware of the existence or just doesn't care. Chapman is written as a character who speaks first and thinks later, meaning he is completely incompetent at his job, and we just have to wonder why he passed the test in the first place to become an inspector. Or this apology thing is as sarcastic as possible and done for a more psychopathic intention, but even then Chapman doesn't strike me as a psychopath. Yet. I don't think I need to get into the whole psychological analysis bit just yet, but Chapman this entire time is just being a weirdo. To Samuel, he has no problem calling him stinky. And yet to these union officers, he just wants them to do their job and he fears getting cancelled. I don't think I have answered the question yet, but what exactly is a theme here? If killing a gay character, who is the only gay character in the whole book, means you're homophobic due to the theme and how people can read into it, why can't I read into this and believe the theme is that unions are evil and cause an unfair environment that benefits failure and punishes those who do things right, but simply say the wrong things? This is what we're being told through these events, so why can't I read it like that? Or better yet, why can't I read that females are the worst detectives, since the worst detective here in this trio is Clid, with how bad she was at making any connections or even getting a single coherent sentence out. And granted, I don't remember if Daniel said that the theme is this kind of thing, but I know he is friends with multiple white women who did say these things, like Meglator and Jenna Morrissey, and I don't think he's ever said they're wrong. Oh, the turmoil of being a beta! Roland said, I know you meant well, Inspector, but you really are terrible with the men. Good thing Chapman is more into the ladies, if you know what I mean. Wait a minute, Chapman says, Gods, I knew. He's an officer of God, but then he says, gods? So, is this religion monotheistic or polytheistic? Because that's really important to know before anything is even said about these stupid jobs. Is Chapman a pagan or some kind of heathen? I can't tell if this is a typo, a contradiction, or some strange type of foreshadowing. After this, Chapman asks the other officer for his name, the one he calls Shits for Brains. Officer Shit-Eater tells him his name, but we, as the reader, don't get it. Like, because Chapman gets too occupied in realizing he didn't know this person's name, this causes him to not get the name later. I can't tell if this is funny or not. It's a little bit more annoying than funny. If there was a bit more goofiness with this name gag, maybe it would be funny, like, he's about to say the name and then they get interrupted by someone else coming in. Or better yet, I would have loved it if the officer said his name was Shits, and that could have had Chapman think to himself, oh, lucky guess, but unlucky family. Or something witty like that. It's a nice try, but it's lacking. This whole trying to be cartoony while trying to be taken seriously at the same moment is a middle ground that pleases nobody. Just go all the way in one direction and quit trying to do the splits. Chapman throws a pipe into the darkness in case someone was ready to shoot, because I guess footsteps sound like a pipe clattering on bricks. This is a weird kind of video game logic that works with inhuman monsters but doesn't really work on sapient beings. Especially since the darkness of the cellar is supposed to be incredibly dark, as in, nothing can be seen in the cellar. What sounds smart at first ends up being really dumb because we are not in a video game, we are in a novelette. Sorry Daniel if you wanted to add this as a game mechanic for a possible video game adaptation made by the same company that ruined Order 1886, but this doesn't work in a story unless you're expecting Chapman to battle a xenomorph or a graboid.
Don't tell me how to play.
Page 22.
Sometimes it doesn't matter what you know, what you feel just takes over.
There's a very strange interaction where Rollins asks Chapman, nerves, sir? And Chapman says, no, not in the way you mean. This is after Clid and Samuel enter the room or whatever they're in, and Chapman breathes a sigh of relief. I understand that Daniel wants to have a fancy dialogue that is supposed to be educated, because these are high members of society with old-timey vernacular, but what the hell does this even mean? Nerves? No, not the way you mean. Isn't it supposed to be yes, but not in the way you mean? Because this would hint that Samuel and Clid make him nervous. But then, why would they make him nervous? And if it is no, then what is the point of saying no, not in the way you mean? The only way I can make sense of this is if Daniel tries to write the same paragraph but in two different ways, and then accidentally combine them without noticing. But if that was the case, this means that he and everyone who beta read this missed this terrible passage. And if that's the case, why is so much being missed by so many eyes? I'm not really a good reader, no matter what people think of me or how I may portray myself with this channel. But if something doesn't make sense upon the first glance, I read it again. Maybe my brain is focused on logic or something, I don't know. But to miss this many mistakes, and we're barely halfway through the second chapter out of 8 chapters, out of about 9 pages total, and we're expected to pay about $4 for this slop, I find this as nothing more than a cat's grab done by Indian scammers. I know that Daniel wrote it himself, I don't doubt that, but it makes more sense that an Indian scammer wrote it. So here's the thing. Chapman is distraught that Clyd and Samuel are there, because he makes a magic face that shows he wants them to leave. Then Samuel uses the idiom moon over, and I can't help but feel that this is an American slang again. To moon over is like to mourn over, but is more like to pine over, meaning to think longingly about something to the point where you become sad. Again, this term makes sense, but it doesn't feel like it belongs in this setting in a colloquial sense. I guess Daniel was simply fine with having everyone speak American or something, as if that doesn't take people out of the scene. This is an Americanized fantasy world written by an American author, so don't expect any other theme related to any other culture, you got that? Clyd asks to help Chapman, and Chapman refuses because his backup is Roland's. Oh, a bromance. How sweet. But then Clyd asks to back up Roland's as a passive-aggressive way to get what she wants, which is to follow Chapman into the cellar. That's been open for the longest time, but nothing has come out or made a noise, despite the fact that people said they heard sounds from the cellar. At this rate, whatever is in there already died from starvation or old age. Then the narrator congratulates Clyd by saying she exhausted them with professionalism. No bitch, you manipulated them by being a passive-aggressive interloper. Also, not to go super far back to something I was previously talking about, but why the hell does Chapman need to moon over the monarch in the bedroom when he was already in that room? Clyd and Samuel found nothing in that room as evidence other than the dead body. Oh great, she's dead. What gave it away? Her heart on the dresser or the skin being peeled off like a banana? Please, Daniel, point me to the professionalism, because I haven't seen it from any of these nutbags yet. Chapman huffed, turned, raised his lantern, and began marching down the stairs, preferring the unknown blackness to his present company. Chapman, no, don't do it. Everyone knows that once you go into the black, you never come back. Page 23. I want to praise what follows because as they go down the dark cellar, Daniel gives us details such as how the light responds to the surroundings and how wine bottles glisten from the lights. This is a great imagery that lets us understand where we are and what it looks like. I can almost feel the scene if there was a bit more smell and maybe a bit on temperature. Cellars get cold because they are underground, so maybe have that added to the chill that's going up the spines that's mentioned, as well as maybe some wind howling and other noises or lack of noises. My only question for this is, where were the details before when we needed them? This story has a pocket of good writing, maybe once a chapter, and then it goes away again. I spoke to a friend of mine once about a problem he had with his writing, where it felt disjointed, and he said it's because he would leave and come back over a long period of time, writing it little by little, and it kind of went with his different moods and how long he had to write. This seems to be similar to the same problem Daniel might have encountered. It's not that the scenes are disjointed, they are downright contradictory half the time, but rather he'll be in a mood for one moment, and then I guess when he just wants information to be given, he copy and pastes his notes down. This kind of writing, well, in bursts, is not that bad because we get something out of it, but it looks lazy and half-assed when there's so much potential. It shows us that you can write a small scene well, but it runs out of steam too quickly. Samuel calls out to the darkness that they are the police and it's safe, and here's another small thing to complain about with how the sentence works. I understand it's tiny, but it's distracting and makes the writing look bad. So, when Samuel is talking, he lowers his weapon. A sentence before this, Chapman raised his weapon. Then before this, Clyd took out her weapon. It tells us in a domino way that one person took their weapon out after another, and yet we never know when Samuel took out his pistol. I can't help but to point that out. Not only is it silly that Chapman would pull out his gun last, but now I'm supposed to know when Samuel took out his pistol, when it was never told to us that it was even out. Also, I keep saying pistol really loud because they are not holding pistols. They have revolvers. Unless somehow everyone else is limited to a revolver and these three officers have handguns with fixed chambers. If these are pistols, there are two possibilities. They are holding single-shot muzzle-loaded pistols like one a pirate would use, while everyone else has revolvers. Or they own tech that is similar to the 1890s, aka something like World War I tech because that's when they started to make stuff like semi-automatic pistols and bolt-action rifles. It seems Daniel thought pistol was the word for all handguns, but that term would be handguns, not pistols. Revolvers have a revolving chamber, hence the name. Pistols have a fixed chamber. I understand that guns are hard for the leftist liberals to understand. I knew nothing about guns either when I was a young leftist liberal, but the least Daniel could have done was a tiny bit of research into terms that he's using so that there's a sign of respect for the content within. I'm sure I've made the same mistakes in the past too. I've written so much stuff for so long that I don't remember. But we cannot overcome mistakes if we don't know the mistake was made. So Daniel, if you're listening to this, hello and welcome to your quick gun terminology tutorial. I hope you learned something from it. Also, speaking of learning, I learned that Daniel added a smell to the story right after I complained about him not talking about smells. A wish and you shall receive. Same with sound. We have stuff like Clid's ears starved for sound because of how quiet it is, and I like that kind of thing. Especially because starved being used for sound is a great way to portray a yearning, as if it's required for survival. But between these two, we have a problem.
Conductor, we have a problem!
She found herself fighting an odd sense of vertigo, an instinctive terror that, were she to try to run back to safety, she would only encounter an infinite hallway of wine bottles. I actually have two problems with this. Vertigo is a symptom of feeling like the environment is spinning, not that the environment is warping into an infinity. Also, why is she feeling so irrational when it's just a dark cellar? I understand that Daniel wanted this to sound tense and confusing so that it feels tense, but this just makes the reader confused as to both what's going on and why she feels this way. And darkness can make the path forward feel infinite, but not on the way back because she already took the steps she did. Or what, is this some kind of reverse Mario 64 staircase reference? Page 24.
Look into my eyes. I'm going to hypnotize you. Yes, you. Right now. No, don't look away. Look into my eyes. Relax. You want to smoke. You want to smoke that will make your mouth taste fresh.
So, the group splits into two sides. Chapman going with Roland, for one, and the Down syndrome duo taking the other. As Clid freaks out about the darkness, Samuel tries to tell her to shut her stupid ass up, but in the beta way that he does. Can't be slapping around hysterical women in the Gasland fantasy. This is a respectful dystopia, not the 1930s.
Calm down. Get a hold of yourself.
Clid gets something sticky on her shoe. Something tells me that Chapman or Rollins can shoot a 2-inch string of cum across the room rather well, if you catch my drift. Alas, it's black liquid on the floor. Well, no wonder it's so dark in here. We get more smelly smells that smell smelly, and I love it. The black liquid smells like a round corpse, which tells me it's something similar to ectoplasm, of a more visceral kind, or some kind of necrobiomatter, similar to when roadkill liquefies from bacteria decomposition. Consider me a bit too much with horror, but I think corpse goo is a nice touch that does cause interest and tension. I think this is a great thing to include, but as we will realize, this kind of phenomena is well known by the officers, as they never once tried to say, what if this murder was done by the supernatural stuff we all know about and fight against on a daily basis? But I guess having that as a hint during the red herring of an opening would spoil the chapter 2 plot twist. A bit of advice to you, dear reader. If the fantasy aspect of your story is going to be revealed a chapter in, just tell us the fantasy element from the beginning. I know Lovecraftian stories tend to establish the scene and then get into the occult stuff after, but this is a high fantasy world, and we like to know what's high fantasy about it because it's not Earth. Or is it? Just kidding, it's not Earth. Daniel spoiled that part on his channel before the book was even out. Clid makes a small squeak. Samuel is startled. Roland cries out right after, and then Samuel nods to Clid. What does that mean? He's going to run away from Clid to Hell Rollins? Accidentally gay-coded much? Well, let's find out. Page 25. I guess this is a good place to stop and talk about Clid's fear of the dark. Nyctophobia comes from the Greek goddess Nyx, which means night. Clid being afraid of the dark means she's afraid of both chaos and primary femininity. This is a great thing to have if Clid is more on the tomboyish side, where she hates femininity or absolutely fears it. I mention this because this type of thing accidentally contradicts the feminist position that it tries to develop prior, with Clid being a strong independent woman who don't need no man other than her husband. The love of darkness is both gothic in nature due to the romanticization of darkness and horror, and witchcraft holds darkness as supreme and preferred. The moon, the stars, the night sky, the darkness of inner thoughts, and the chaos of emotional nature, these are all supposed to be embraced by the feminine. However, because the story is post-modernist, I understand that the goal is to contradict through deconstruction and trope subversion. What I'm saying is that this story missed out on a great opportunity for a gothic element to be portrayed better. But because gothic doesn't come into play as a character or a plot aesthetic, we have to say any attempt at gothic elements are half-assed or unsuccessful. Or I guess we can call this postmodern goth, where it's defined by black clothes and Samuel being born goth-ish. Back to the story. Clyd and Samuel run deeper into the cellar towards, I don't know. They see Chapman running at the end of the cellar, and when they call out to him, he points his gun at them, but then continues his chase because they weren't a threat yet. Clyd and Samuel bitch and moan that Chapman left Rollins on his own. Yeah, because we all know he needs a wrangler with the scores he got in his Inspector test. But then Rollins says he's fine, and then Clyd and Samuel throw a hissy fit. Rollins is right fucking there, unharmed. What's the problem? Why the hell do these people need to be babied? I get it, don't leave your partner behind, brothers in arms, and let's jerk each other up before the sergeant finds us in the showers like last time. But the only thing that happened was that Chapman ran faster, while both of them ran together, and that's it. Maybe make these officers of God less like helicopter parents, and more like actual officers. Just a thought. Chapman says they're not alone, and they all group together to cover the 4 directions with their guns. I like that idea, but it could have been explained way more simply. Samuel asks if Rollins is okay, and Rollins is like, yeah dude, nothing happened. Are you gonna breastfeed me now, or where's this going? Then Chapman cocks back his pistol's revolver. In one of the Dirty Lore House episodes with Edgy, he was rightfully furious with this sentence.
Oh, here it is. This is the exact line. I'm gonna read it. Chapman cocked his pistol's revolver. Okay, you mean he cocked the hammer of the revolver?
Again, a pistol is not a revolver, but at least he knew something had to be cocked, so points for trying. Chapman reveals that what he saw was not a man. So the thing making black goo is a woman? Clyd almost broke her watch to look at Chapman. I know he meant her focus on her direction of where she's watching for activity, but the way it's written makes it seem like she turned and her pocket watch nearly fell out. Try to use words with less multiple meanings for colloquial clarity, thank you. The worst thoughts the seller had conjured sprang forward. It's actually a monster, which Clyd noticed because of a wine bottle reflection. The monster is described as having a viper-like face, a long neck, like a viper, no lips, like a viper, dead teeth, like a meth addict, black eyes, like a viper. It has fingers like a human, and yet the body is more like if that Mortal Kombat character Meat was wearing a scrubby coat. So this is a demon in this world, which might look a bit closer to the common conception of a ghoul or something. Clyd shoots it, black blood falls on her, and it makes a high-pitched shriek. Honestly, I'm loving this kind of stuff, even though it's written a bit goofy. I'm a sucker for action scenes like this. Page 26 and 27. The demon is screaming, and it's not looking pretty. The sound is so terrible that it scrambles their brains and makes everyone miss their shots like stormtroopers. The demon then falls on Clyd like a wet sack of shit and, well, Clyd gets covered in black slime and she looks like what a hooker's client looks like after a coffee table breaks above him. Ah, come on, that was a tasteful one. Tasted like shit, but it was tasteful. Wow! Ding dong, the monster's dead. Let's see what they do with the body. I hope it has orifices with no teeth. Clyd gets traumatized, and I love this kind of moment. It reminds me of those zombie animes with those big titty babes getting covered in blood and then the lights are on but nobody's home. Clyd was given a hot Carl by a demon without the saran wrap, and I can feel the pain in her reaction. This part is written very nicely, and I also love the touch of relatability where it says, "A weight was pulled off of her chest. Something began to wipe the foul blood from her eyes and mouth." This passage is saying she can't even tell what's going on other than the physical feeling, as if her other senses turned off to save the body from the shock of having gallons of corpse sludge sprayed into her mouth like a broken soda fountain. And she's like, "Oh man, I swallowed some." It looks like she's gonna need some Pepto-Bismol for that future tummy ache. She then vomits 3 times. Well, 3rd time's a charm. Samuel rubs her back but doesn't hold back her hair. The fucking scumbag. Chapman puts on his gloves and then shoots the demon in the chest 2 more times, even though it was shot in the head. I guess the blood constantly pumping out means the heart or hearts were still pumping, which is actually a nice touch. Honestly, I praise this kind of scene more than I thought I would. All I can think of is, where was this dedication in the first chapter? There's so much thought going on through here that I can't help but to feel the first chapter was written poorly on purpose. If that was the case, why? I kinda think chapter 2 should have been the first chapter. I know, this is the action part, blah blah blah. I'm only liking it because they're shooting, but I can't help to feel like, imagine Clyd walking up to the manor with her husband, and then they find Chapman at the cellar. Then they're like, need a hand? And Chapman with Roland just cracks it open and goes, sure, I'll put this crowbar somewhere where nobody will touch it, like in your wife's kid shit. Oh. Then they can do their little skit. They go down to the cellar, they find the monster, bing bang boom, already interested. Or, better yet, have a child play in the cellar when they were told not to. Then the monster attacks, we get to know the family, bing bang boom, we then see them dead in chapter 2, and the investigation goes on from there. Maybe the one playing in the cellar could be the one hanging on the chain outside. That would intrigue the fuck out of me and suck me right in. But that didn't happen, so now I'm like, meh. Page 28. Samuel asks Chapman if the demon was still alive. Chapman says no and finds an empty vial on the demon. I guess this is supposed to make Chapman look suspicious for shooting a demon that's dead? Or am I right about the heart still pumping? Because Chapman says the heart was still pumping. That's why he shot it, and Rollins goes, then it was alive. Is there a quota where someone has to contradict themselves at least once a scene? I'm just surprised Rollins caught this one. Quick, somebody check out the window and see if pigs are flying. I can't tell if contradictions are intentional, as in, this is bad writing and characterization. Is Daniel trying to make his characters a big fat mess? Like, who told him that was a good idea? Was it Miglator? Sounds like something she would say. I'm betting money that he listened to a woman somewhere in some way, and that is what's causing a lot of issues here. Speaking of, Clyd wants Chapman to explain, because I guess only Chapman knows about demons in this group. Isn't that something everyone should know about, or is he one of those special supernatural hunters like in the show Supernatural? I thought he was supposed to be the youngest and stupidest of the group next to Rollins. Why is he suddenly the demon whisperer? Chapman holds the empty vial up, but now it's filled with black slime. This is nothing new. Amazon drivers have a bottle of black slime in their vans all the time. They have a bottle of steamy hot orange piss in there too. You name the body fluid and an Amazon driver has a bottle of it somewhere in the van. Yes, it's that disgusting, but you're still going to let the Amazon driver lick your face when they deliver your dildos. Oh well, back to the story. Chapman says the answer is right there, and that it used to be a man. Remember earlier when Chapman said it was not a man? Yeah, apparently both Chapman and Daniel forgot all about that. But who the hell is this dude that they just killed? Chapman tells the others to keep quiet about the vial as a bunch of cops enter. After the fight, naturally. I don't mind that. I use the trope too, but really? 12 officers? Where were these people before? At the dinner table eating all the royal donuts before they go stale? The team takes the dead demon to the Ministry of Health for a report, and they will send the info to the 7th precinct for the guys to find out the results. I'm going to praise Daniel on this one for a bit because precinct is a good word to use for this. They are police, they are religious, they are of a kingdom, and so precinct is used in relation to those 3 things, and that strengthens the word usage. Bravo, Daniel. If you're gonna have religious police under a monarchy, use the word precinct. However, precinct is only used for police in the United States, so this further strengthens the idea that Daniel is trying to Americanize what is usually a European motif. That's colonization for you.
Breach of Peace is terrible. Don't let anyone else tell you anything otherwise. This book is hot garbage. Let's exactly get into why. First of all,
Page 29. The last part of this chapter doesn't have much to complain about. It's just them saying they can connect the demon to the murder and Clyd needs a shower because she's stinky, but they tell her to take a shower at the precinct. Why do they want the carriage she will be sitting in for hours to be so stinky with her? Why not, I don't know, use a shower in the manor? It's not like the family who was killed wouldn't mind. It's like taking a watch from a dead guy. He's not gonna use it. Maybe Daniel didn't know, but people were very hospitable in the old days, and these officers have power. which he said they have a crazy amount of power over the people where they can kill them and nobody can stop them. Why not take a shower at the manor? Is that too much to ask? Almighty knew if this was even accurate. So, their god is called Almighty, or did Daniel use an adjective as a noun? He capitalized it, so their god is named Almighty? Is that supposed to be the god's last name like Bruce Almighty? Chapman and Samuel give Clyd their notes so she can wipe her ass with them, probably. And now we come to the worst sentence in the entire book. Clyd left the last crime scene of her career. Daniel, I get it. You wanted foreshadowing that would make people read more. But being this on the nose ends up breaking the nose from the vast amount of force. People don't like this kind of thing because it reveals the ending a bit too much. It's like in the second chapter The Lord of the Rings said, "Out of the Shire Frodo frolicked, as his first steps to save the day in returning the ring to Mordor. Also, Aragorn becomes king later, but we don't know who he is yet." I was playing Arkham Knight the other day, and the game begins with a random cop saying,
"This is how the Batman died."
I know I'm getting off subject, but this is a horrible opening to start the story. Who the hell told these people that we're interested in more by such a sentence at the beginning? I know it's only half of the information, but now I know that Clyd dies, and all I can say is, good riddance, because of how useless her character has been so far. At the very least, I could expect her to be fired for being shit at her job. But she's a diversity hire, so she'd probably get promoted. Do I really need to continue the analysis anymore if the ending is already told to us in the beginning? Well, yes, I do, because to a lot of people out there, it's the journey that matters, not the destination. The ending can be good or bad, and that usually doesn't cause a big change in how people see the majority of the story. Unless we want to talk about those endings that ruin stories entirely, it's quite amazing how much the beginning and ending of a story can make or break it, and yet the middle is treated as a safe space. But here we are at the 25% mark, and so we've encountered the inciting incident, which is what leads us into the second act and into the rising action. Let's summarize this steaming pile of Resident Evil 5 slime. Summary. Before I start with my snide shenanigans, I wanted to mention that having black slime being related to Resident Evil is not a bad thing. I actually enjoy such a thing. I just thought that Resident Evil 5 did black slime poorly in that opening where everything was covered by it, but we didn't have to worry about it, like, at all, except for when that worm creature attacked. I mean, maybe the programming was hard to have slime as a threat, but you know, that's way off topic. Let's get this over with. You probably have stuff to do and other analysis videos to watch, like my other ones, assuming you're listening to this long after the release date and I have a big catalog of stuff that future me made before dying in the closet wearing a Batman suit. So, here are the basics. Exposition phase is over. We had our inciting incident, the demon attacking and being revealed, and now we're into the active protagonist part where they engage in finding out what's going on. That is assuming we are still reading after such a sidewinder of a reveal that was not foreshadowed or even hinted at properly with how many red herrings existed in the first chapter. Was it a good start? No, absolutely not. Is it worth sticking around and finding out more? Maybe. I would say no if the demon thing is yet another red herring, which I think it might be. But so far, the plot itself is becoming engaging and our protagonists have gone from passive to active. During the exposition phase, the protagonist is usually passive because they are reacting to other things happening and initiating the call to action. Superheroes hear someone screaming for help and they leap into action. Once they are active, that's when they start to perform actions for the supervillain to react to. This is the big difference between Act 1 and Act 2 in most stories. Not all, but most. We have action and villains in this story. We have guns. It's hard to tell they are pistols or revolvers with how Daniel switches them around, but we have weapons to do the shoot bang bang with. I believe we meet an antagonist during the second act, so I can assume he's going for a very typical cut and dry type of storytelling. Nothing fancy, very formulaic, but that was broken with red herrings that shouldn't have been there. This is the trouble with some storytellers who are postmodernist. They want to make things simple, but they don't want to be called generic, so they add cliches and useless bits to break the mold, which just diminishes the value of the story for the reader. I don't want to call it an amateur move, because it's actually a bad aesthetic move caused by postmodernist mentality. Not all postmodernist writers have this issue, remember? Evil Dead is made well, but it's the lack of appropriate usage. A red herring is common with a mystery, but to begin with a red herring of an opening is no bueno. I would mention the hero's journey here if it was appropriate, but I don't think Daniel is going for that. None of these characters seem to need a hero's journey, they're simply there to solve a case and get fame, apparently. If it was related to Daniel's intention, I would say the end of chapter 2 is where we cross the threshold, which is part 5 out of 12. I know all these numbers get confusing, especially when I'm talking about the same story but with multiple endings within the parts and whatnot, but this kind of confusion is why I prefer to use the 21 parts of the tarot plot more, because it includes all these while taking out the separations of acts and points and such. 3 acts, 12 parts of the hero's journey, 7-point structure. That equals 21 individual moments of different stuff happening. But what do I know? I said this on a subreddit, and because one woman disagreed, I got banned. True story. It was a smaller fantasy-related subreddit, appropriately enough. I guess everyone's opinion should be respected except for the ones that have over thousands of years of evidence to back it up. Speaking of respecting opinions in fantasy subreddits, there was a controversy that occurred during the release of this book that I wanted to go over really quickly because it tells us more about what Daniel was thinking when he wrote a lot of the second chapter. In his video, Authorial Intent and Freedom, it's important. He made it all about how there was a mod on the Our Fantasy subreddit who was given an ARC copy, and said that it's obvious from the themes that Daniel is pro-police and monarchy.
So I sent an early review copy to Travis, who has his own podcast. He's involved with the r/fantasy subreddit. Here's what I actually want to say, which might surprise people at first. His criticism is completely valid. To the people who are saying, I'm clearly like pro-cop having all this power. No again. This is me writing from the perspective of religious extremist cultists. Now I make these characters likable in some ways.
What? See how much of a nice guy Daniel is? He lets people know that their opinion is valid, and they are fully entitled to their opinion. But to Daniel, they are fucking wrong and retarded. So how exactly did they get to that conclusion? Well, Daniel tried to make the police officers the voice of reason, and all the normal people they interacted with are either rebels, who are committing terrorist acts, or they are simply there as background furniture. And Daniel goes...
And I did make sure to put at least one officer in here, who I think people can get behind.
And I assume this was Rollins, who acted like he was more sensitive than a clit after round 5. Call me crazy, but maybe he had the oppressive police force more well-rounded as an oppressive police force, instead of trying to show only the good eggs and hope a situation where they kill someone in the holding is enough to say they are bad people. I think Daniel wanted them to appear like anti-heroes, but he kept making them these feminist, eco-friendly goody-two-shoes who started a union to make sure nobody gets their feelings hurt. Call it the Archie Bunker effect, call it Daniel being terrible with storytelling, but at least Daniel is clear that he doesn't like Nazis.
And I did a lot of research into like your average person during 1940s, 40s Germany, how they did logical loops and backflips to try and justify themselves living in this world. And I put that in the book. Do I agree with it? No! Absolutely no! 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 Ugh! No!
Why not? What do they do that makes you not like their political ideology? Do you like an environmental protection program? Do you like the idea of an individual being prevented from having their activities clashing with the whole, as in being offensive to a protected class? Do you like the idea of breaking debt slavery, such as the horrible debt that college kids suffer through these days? How about a large-scale old age welfare? How about every citizen gets higher education paid for by the government? If these things sound good to you, Daniel, you're actually a Greene with a big chunk of the 25-point program that the Nazis had as their main goal. So maybe there's a lot in Nazism that Daniel could agree with, and yet he acts as if everything they stood for was entirely repulsive and instantly evil. This is not me saying Nazis were good. This is me asking, what exactly do you disagree with when it comes to Nazism? And that's a legitimate question, because if he doesn't know what a Nazi even is, or does, or believes in, how can he say he doesn't like him? I study Nazis in order to understand how Nazi Germany came to rise during the time it did, and I hate Nazism from understanding this. I can easily tell you why I don't like Nazis. They use flawed scientism to lock people up and kill them due to race. They make everything ran by the government that was full of corruption and nepotism. And they redistributed property from the undesirables to the desirables. Oh yeah, and they started World War II in order to create a globalist empire full of corporations. It also doesn't help that people like Daniel might demand a lot of what Nazis also demanded, but perhaps a couple of things are changed or less radical because of how it's no longer trendy to be openly against the people the Nazis were against. Except for, I guess, capitalism, since Nazis hated capitalism. Isn't it strange that the current day leftists hold a lot in common with Nazis when we remove the buzzwords and leave it open to have different nouns take place as victims of the verbs? I mean, the only thing I didn't have to change was globalist and corporation, since these refused to change for the time being. Mostly since a lot of them remained in power after WW2. I don't want this whole video to be like, hey Daniel, how about them Nazis, eh? But I want you as a writer to understand that simply saying, no, I don't like it, doesn't give us any hint that you even understand the subjects, let alone why you don't like something, because you are declaring and not explaining. This also gives you the idea on how Daniel doesn't know what he's writing, even if he says, I did not intend to write X.
Whether an author intended a symbolic resonance to exist in her book is irrelevant. All that matters is whether it's there, because the book does not exist for the benefit of the author, the book exists for the benefit of you.
Perhaps the intention matters, but so does the end result of what's happening. If I intended to eat a salad, but instead I fuck my dog, I think it's a bit too much of misunderstanding how actions work that cause such a drastic change in the end result. This is a mental blindness that plagues left to no end. Especially now that we are in an age of leftists writing stories that go over their ideology, and only their ideology. Daniel's not woke enough for the R fantasy crowd. Don't worry Daniel, you'll get there one day. Just drink more soy and eat more Impossible Burgers, and I guess fry your brain with drugs a bit to fit in more snugly. I agree with Daniel. The intent is important, and so is the freedom to not be compared or related to the evil acts of our villains and characters as if we did the action. But this is a Mutt and Bailey that tries to hide the actual issues within the story and within Daniel's defense. Just because you say, I don't like murder, doesn't mean that you're now able to say, my themes were done properly, which I'm sure he would agree that his themes were handled poorly, which would make his video intentionally pointless lip service. And I guess he's playing safe by refusing to enter the conversation about Nazis, because that is a big old can of worms that he'd open for his fans to negatively react to. Judging from how Lindsay talks about her riot tweet, we all know how that goes. But I think we can get more into the horrible handling of the theme and his cringy damage control in another video. Time for the rundown where I simplify everything down to 6 core elements that every story needs to wow the reader. Are you ready? Plot. We're now into the real plot, where the murderer is found and is a demon. And I can see more fantasy elements to come from this rather abrupt reveal. The best I can say is that the inciting incident hit, and it hit rather hard. So the plot gets a positive here, although it's not complete positive because the first chapter dragged it down. By itself it's awesome, but that first chapter really pulls it down as a weird fantasy switcheroo. Characters. I liked the demon because he died. The demon didn't annoy me. All he did was scream. The 12 new cops didn't annoy me either with anything they said. Great additions to the cast because we'll never see them again. Clid gaining nyctophobia was a nice direction, but a terrible idea, due to symbolic implications that conflict with the rest of the story, and I think it's rather stupid that we have a high-ranking officer with a phobia so severe it involves literally 10 hours of every day, and that's when you're outside. We're to expect she doesn't die? Also, the idea of everyone having to treat Roland like he's a waterhead was a terrible addition. But what do I know? This feminist matriarchy empire is supposed to be a dystopia according to Daniel, right? Dialogue. There was a little bit of good when Clid was traumatized and the rest was useless. I did not care for any dialogue here, except from Chapman, even with the officer nasty gag. Officer spits, officer swallows, whatever, it sucked.
Well, which is it, baby? Spits or swallows?
Despite it being darker than the new James Bond, there was more detail for the scenery and the senses than anything else so far in the story. It was so pleasant I had to ask myself, where was this in the first chapter? However, we still don't know what guns they are using, and we don't even know what kind of guns they are, because they keep magically changing. That is, unless they are revolvers with a clip and handle, which just might be Daniel's version of the gunblade. Theme. Very much like the only kid who was nice to the school shooter, the theme is absent and I have no idea what it could be. I guess by proxy, we have to say the theme is that feminist socialist matriarchies are dystopias as long as they have a religion involved, but that the religion is the only power that can save us from demons because these are officers of God. Maybe not the theme Daniel wanted, but that's what he's written so far. It's amazing that one of the mods from Our Fantasy would accuse Daniel of being pro-police with themes provided. Tone. There's horror, there's disgust, there's trauma. Finally, the tone is here. And it's still a little lacking, but I would say this isn't bad at all for when it's needed. This one gets a mini pass. Overall. By itself, with no other influences, I would give this chapter maybe a 4 out of 10. Fun near the end, stupid everywhere else, they cancel each other out. The stupid is a tad bit stronger, that makes a 4. However, because the first chapter came before this, I had to judge it as part of a continuation, and this chapter makes the total story so far a 3.5 out of 10. If you're wondering why it's 3.5, this is because 3 plus 4 is 7, and when the two chapters are combined, it makes a total out of 20, thus 7 out of 20, which makes 3.5 out of 10. Isn't math fun? So now we have demons, eh? I guess because the first chapter was useless and chapter 2 is not too bad, we can try to use chapter 3 to determine if the overall story near the beginning can be considered good, as a tiebreaker. I didn't want to spend the whole video on only one chapter, but since we escaped the exposition phase so quickly, I had no choice but to do so. Next time, we're going to enter chapter 3, take on the first half of the rising action up until the middle point, and we should see the villain by the midpoint. If we don't, well, then the villain's gonna have little time to make any mark on us. Let's hope it's not as much of a skid mark as our heroes leave on us. Till next time.